We're going to be using a piece called The Value of Philosophy. I know some professors who refuse to teach on this. I'm biased, but I'm fair. But if we get this down, the central question, what is philosophy good for? Then we will come away, just like we did with the 3 parts of morality. Okay, I know I'm supposed to be looking for 3 parts of morality. And if I haven't found the 3 parts by then, I need to go back and read and figure them out. We know, once we get this question down, what we are supposed to find in the reading. And that's so important, so central. And then now it becomes just a point of like, fill in the blank. What is it good for? What's good for this? It's good for that. It's good for that, right? And so that brings us to these 5 goods of philosophy. And the first one is food for the mind. I will show you where in the readings I got these. I picked them up. Okay. So we left off here. This view of philosophy appears to result partly from a wrong conception of the kinds of goods, right there. There it is again, the kinds of goods which philosophy strives to achieve, right? He says here, physical science, through medium inventions, is useful to numerous people who are wholly ignorant of it. It helps people. It fixes problems. It solves things. Philosophy, unfortunately, doesn't do that. It's not useful in that way. He says, thus, the study of physical science is to be recommended. That is, you probably want your kids studying that, or you probably want university programs to pop up around that. Not only primarily because of the effect of on the student, but rather because of the effect on mankind in general. It's super good for everyone. Thus, utility or usefulness does not belong to philosophy. However, it's not, he means utility in a specific way, like usefulness, that is like practical use, as he said up here, or scientific use or something like that. That kind of utility is not going to be the product of philosophy. So what is it good for? Now, the first good that I've identified is food for the mind. And I'll show you where I got that. It's right here. As you can see, right where my red bar is. Food for the mind. Now, philosophy is food for the mind. Now, this sounds super cool, right? It's a slogan. It's a bumper sticker slogan. Philosophy is food for the mind. But what the heck does he mean? Philosophy is food for the mind. Well, it probably means something like you would expect. He means it's nourishing in a particular way to the mind, and it keeps you sharp and so on. And you might think, well, don't all studies do that? Probably, they might all do that, but they're going to do it in different ways. So let's examine kind of what he says further. He says here, and in my notes, I say here, he has this thought experiment Russell imagines. And this is where I'm picking this up. He immediately says this down here. He says, of all men who are well off, poverty and disease, if you see poverty and disease right there, that's where I'm reading. But I'll show you my paraphrase of it. He says, imagine, suppose we had all of poverty solved and every basic need met, food, shelter, clothing, etc. What else would we need? Of course, he answers, a lot. We would need all these other things. Now, why does he ask this? Food, shelter, clothing? Because if you go back to the reading, this is the result of this practicality. Practical means something like pragmatic would be a synonym. Practical means of usefulness, of use, and then something that I can put into action, right? These are problem-solving disciplines that he's thinking of, right? Problem-solving disciplines that would solve poverty and disease and so on and so on. He says, though, there would still remain much to be done, right? In this sort of situation, right here, what else does society need? His answer, a lot. In this sort of situation, you're surviving, but you're not thriving. I promise you, if this is all you had, it would be great because no more poverty and disease and so on, but you would be miserable because your mind wouldn't be active. You would be surviving, but you wouldn't be thriving. Now, he says, as I paraphrase here, we still need things to enrich the life of the mind. For example, art, music, and entertainment. Now, why do I pick those? Because those are examples of things that engage the mind. Let's just think of them. Art, music, entertainment. You just imagine the things, think of the things that you really enjoy, the things that you love, music that you really like listening to, on your commute or whatever podcast, or, you like binge watching Netflix or YouTube videos, whatever it may be. All of that requires the engagement of the mind. So, for example, music. The songs you listen to, look, a basic smart animal could enjoy music. A dog or maybe a parrot or something can like bob their head to the music. But humans in particular, they are especially suited to enjoying music in a way because they engage their mind with it. They're able to music evokes memories, it evokes some certain emotions. And if you're really good at your music theory, you can see connections and so on that is not obvious to the naked eye. And you're not using, obviously, it's not just the simple sensory or physical pleasure of the sound waves hitting your eardrums. Cool, that feels pleasurable. No, it's pleasurable because it's engaging your mind. If you think about, binge watching Netflix, you're not getting pleasure out of that activity because of the light waves hitting your eyes. And then, you suddenly, it's very pleasant. No, you are engaged mentally. You want to see what happens with the story. You want to figure out if it's like a kind of mystery thing or something. You want to see what happens, want to see how it develops. That is engaging your mind. If you think about the opposite of that, like what would happen, for example, if I didn't have mental engagement? Well, all you got to do is ask the question, why do people get bored? Why are humans bored? How does that happen? I would argue that it has to do with a lack of mental engagement. People get bored because they're not mentally engaged. So just think in your history, your life, if you've ever had a job where you were monotonous, doing the same thing over and over and over again, just kind of like a zombie, like maybe like a production line or a line cook or something like that, you're very physically active, but you're kind of dead. And it's very miserable. It's almost torture, because you're not engaged. You're checked out. So that's not pleasant. And a lot of boredom occurs because you're not engaged in what you're seeing or experiencing or something. So it turns out that the life of the mind, all this food for the mind stuff sounds cool and super and like deep and all that, but the life of the mind is extremely important for a well-rounded, robust life as a human being, a good life. So that is our first good of philosophy that he's identified. For our second good of philosophy, well, let me say this before I go on. He does say, look, philosophy is one of those that enriches life and mind. He's not going to say that no other discipline does this, because obviously other ones do. Other sciences and disciplines can contribute to providing food for the body and the mind. But philosophy, along with other arts and humanities and so on, is especially suited to providing food for the mind. And it does it in a very particular way. Okay, the next good of philosophy that I've identified is knowledge. So I'll show you where I picked that up. So this is the first page, of course. If we scroll down, right? We just food for the mind right there at the bottom of page 1. If we scroll down to page 2, we see right here at the very top, he says, philosophy, like all other studies, aims primarily at knowledge. Now, cool. But if I'm reading this critically and not just sort of like going through the motions and like, okay, cool. Okay, what am I, right? I should stop and be shocked at that claim. Philosophy, you get knowledge. Because remember what we said just earlier. When you overhear philosophers discussing things, it does not sound like they're coming to agreement on a lot of things. It doesn't sound like they're exploring the world and discovering and finding knowledge, right? Yet, here is Russell saying, no, like this is what it does. It gets knowledge. It aims at knowledge. Why wouldn't it, like all other disciplines? Now, obviously, philosophy does not always get knowledge. And this is what I say here, like all the disciplines, philosophy aim primarily at knowledge, even if it doesn't attain it. We'll see more of this in number 3 as to why. But you can think about, example of this. And I like to ask my students, can you aim at something even if you never achieve that thing? Can it still truly be said of you that you're aiming at that thing? I mean, arguably, an onlooker could just say, no, they're not aiming at that after all. They're never getting it. But you can imagine certain scenarios, and some examples that students come up with are, sports. Like, sorry about any sports fans, but just think of a team that never wins a championship, like Cleveland Browns, for example. Sorry to all the Cleveland Browns fans. My priest is a Cleveland Browns fan, and when I use this as an example, he doesn't like it, but he's like, oh, yeah. But Cleveland Browns fans, they always, every season, without fail, aim for the Super Bowl, even though they never attain what they aim at. And you might think, Well, maybe not every year. You might think maybe there are some years, because there are in sports what's called like rebuilding years, right? So maybe maybe not all the time. Maybe they're just sometimes they're aiming at all. But I can guarantee you, even those rebuilding years, those quote rebuilding, if they were to win, I don't know, they can say they're not aiming at it, but if they were to win like their first 5 games, let's say, they're not going to be like, guys, chill. Remember, in rebuilding mode, we're not aiming. No, they're going to say, hey, it's Super Bowl or bust. And that just kind of underscores and reveals all along what they were aiming for. And it was that they were aiming for the same thing they always aim for, which is the Super Bowl, even though they never get it. So philosophy is kind of like that. Hopefully we're not in as pathetic as a situation as the Cleveland Browns. We do, as we'll see below here, on number 3, we will see below that reasons, we'll see that there are a couple of things that philosophy does actually attain in some areas, some arenas of knowledge. But so we are successful in some kinds, but can't be said much about it that we are. So, all right. Now, let's look at, so I've said a little bit about that. I'll skip a little bit of this, but we look at number 3. I want to show you where I find this uncertainty. Uncertainty is a good thing. And because, we're connecting it to this up here. So I want to just jump down. Let's see number 3, uncertainty. And this aims primarily at knowledge, even if it doesn't attain it. This is now our next question. Why? Why? Explain to me why it doesn't attain it. Well, there are a couple of reasons. But first of all, why did I put this in number 3 and not just keep it in number 2? Because I'll show you where I picked this up. So I didn't do this arbitrarily. Remember, I'm teaching you how to read, how to take notes. So obviously, number 2 is at the beginning of page 2, right here, aims primarily at knowledge. Number 3 is at the bottom of page 2, where it says here, the value of philosophy is in fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. That's pretty clear. I mean, even if you're counting these differently, it's not just 5 goods, it's maybe some others, maybe less. This is going to be one of them because he repeats the value of philosophy right there. That's the phrase we're after. That's the title of it. And he says largely, to be sought largely. So this is definitely one of the uncertainties, a big one. So that's where I find number 3. However, take a look at this. Our question then becomes why, right? I'm aiming at knowledge. Why don't I ever get it? Okay. Why does philosophy seem to promote so much uncertainty, or let's say not arrive at knowledge, because these 2 and 3 are connected. And I actually have split this into part A answer and part B answer. And I did not do this arbitrarily. I promise you. I will show you why I did this. And it has to do with, you go back to the reading, everything in between on page 2. Like I said, number 2 was found up here, aims primarily at knowledge. That's a good. And then uncertainty, that's a good. But, well, it's going to be somewhere in between that I find that part A and part B. And again, before I jump in here, what question were we looking at? This question. Why does philosophy promote so much uncertainty? Why doesn't it answer the questions that it tries to ask? Okay. Let me show you what he's doing here. So he says here, if you ask a mathematician, a mineralogist, a historian, any other man of learning, what definite body of truths has been ascertained by his science, he's basically going to talk your ear off. It's going to last as long as you're willing to listen. This is what we mentioned earlier. There's a lot of knowledge and truths to be found in these other sciences. However, he says, if you put the same question to a philosopher, he will, if he's candid, if he's honest, have to confess his study has not achieved positive results, such as have been achieved by the other sciences. So you can rephrase this question that we began with. Why does it promote so much uncertainty? Or why does it not get the positive results? Why does it not get the knowledge, right? These are all rolled into the same question, okay? And he answers this question like so. He says, it is true. Why has it not achieved positive? It is true. This is partly accounted for. So I know that this is part of an answer. And I can skip through. I'll read this, of course. But the other part can be found here in this paragraph. This is only, however, a part of the truth. This would be part B. So you see answers to this, part A and part B, they're not arbitrary. This is going to be one part in that paragraph, that we began with. And the next paragraph, this will be the second part, just like so. So this is what he says in part A, and then I'll go to the actual text. This is how I summarize it. He says here, the question is, why does it promote so much uncertainty? Why don't we get answers? Because the questions that do get definite answers cease to be called philosophy and are absorbed by the other sciences. This is what he says here. It is true, this is partly accounted for. Again, part one, part of the answer, accounted for by the fact that as soon as definite knowledge concerning any subject becomes possible, this subject ceases to be called philosophy and becomes a separate science. And he comes with receipts. He's not just claiming this and just like not saying anything else. He says the whole study of the heavens, which now belongs to astronomy, was once included in philosophy. So it happened with astronomy, was philosophy, now it's astronomy. He says it also happened with physics because Isaac Newton, the father of physics, right? And then he also says it's happened with psychology, right? It used to be philosophy, now it's psychology. So this is actually my favorite part of the reading. He's arguing that all of these hard and soft sciences that have definite answers used to be philosophy, right? And part of that, you might have a knee-jerk reaction. You might think, well, gosh, that's an easy thing to claim. Of course, you're going to take credit for all the other disciplines and so on. But he's actually right. I mean, you can see his evidence here, but let's just take a look at this example, because he's got one definitive example. Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, Newton's great work. What is that? Well, if you Google Newton Principia, you can see that it is called, well, let's open the Wikipedia page for it. It is called the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. It is called, as Russell himself said, the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Right here, you can see the translation right here. Isaac Newton, this is the groundbreaking seminal work, magnum opus by Isaac Newton that started the field of physics. Notice that the word physics is nowhere in the title. I mean, you can see that from the English or the Latin. But philosophy is in the title, and it's the very first word, philosophy, right there. This means Isaac Newton did not take himself to be doing physics. He took himself to be doing philosophy, interestingly. Although we don't remember him as a philosopher, that's what he thought of himself as. And this makes sense, right? So like the father of any discipline, the father of any domain or science, in this case, the father of physics, how could you be considering yourself to be doing a discipline that doesn't yet exist, right? If you're the first one to do it and it doesn't exist yet, why would you be doing it? I mean, or thinking that you're doing something that, so of course he took himself to be doing philosophy. We see a really good example here. And if we looked up the other examples that Russell gives, it's the exact same thing. So interestingly, this is one reason why philosophy seems like it doesn't get definite answers, because his answer is they do get definite answers. We just kind of get robbed of them, of all the credit, because it takes the answers. Oh, we got definite, we'll make our own science. And then boom. And as he says here, thus to a great extent, the uncertainty of philosophy is more apparent than real. We do get definite answers. It just looks like we don't. He says, because those questions which do get definite answers are placed in scientists, while those only at which at present no definite answers can be given remain to form the residue, which is called philosophy. In other words, we are left in philosophy with the questions that are really hard to answer, have no definite answers. And we're kind of left holding the bag of non-definite answers, and get no credit for the stuff that we did get right. But that's only part of the truth. Okay. So let's go back to the notes and see what he says here. Why, again, the question is, to revisit this, why does philosophy seem to pose so much uncertainty? Like I say here, he says more apparent than real. It doesn't actually promote this, or it's not actually all full of non-definite answers, but it seems that way. Why does it seem that way? First, we saw this, and then B, he says, because, as I paraphrase here, we'll look at the actual text in a second, because some questions, many of them of a spiritual nature, are just insoluble, or in other words, unsolvable to the human intellect. Now, this is what he says here. He says, the uncertainty of philosophy. There are many questions, and among them, those that are of the profoundest interest to our spiritual life, which I actually appreciate Russell making this point, because he's not a spiritual person. He's actually an atheist, a very well-known atheist, but he still can give credit where credit's due. And he says, like, a lot of these questions are of a spiritual nature. So he says here, many questions which, so far as we can see, must remain unsolvable to the human intellect, basically, unless we evolve big brains, unless we get, way better powers of intellect. Okay. And he gives some examples of these kinds of questions. He gives 3, just like I gave 3 examples up there. He says, does the universe have any purpose to it, or is it just kind of atoms smashing together? Consciousness, is that a permanent part of the universe? Or is it just an accident on a small planet and then we're all just going to die in this heat death? Unfortunately, we're just kind of here. 3, are good and evil of importance to the whole universe and matter objectively, or are they only important to man? Like, do we just sort of make up good and evil and that's just important to us? He says, such questions are asked by philosophy, variously answered by various philosophers, but it would seem that, whether answers be otherwise discoverable or not, the answers suggested by philosophy are none of them demonstrably true. None of them are demonstrably true. He did not say none of them are true. Keyword there, demonstrably. What does demonstrably mean? Well, it means, able to demonstrate. It means provable. None of them are provable. Like, he did not say none of them are true. You might have an answer in philosophy that's true, but there's no way to prove it. So the example I give of this in class is, suppose you just flip coin and you decide you're going to go with even or odd, right? Imagine the number of stars in the universe, assuming a finite universe, and given any particular time, it's going to be a certain number of stars, and those stars are going to be either even or odd. And let's suppose you flip a coin, you end up with even, and it just so happens that your answer is true. However, there's no possible way you're ever going to know, or let alone be able to demonstrate to others and prove it to them that you have the right answer. It's going to be even. You're just in a situation, you're just out of luck, unfortunately, but you might have the true answer. So he's saying that philosophy might be in this sort of situation. You might have a philosophical theory where you have the correct answer, but it's just, when it comes to persuading anybody of it, demonstrating, and proving it and so on, you're just out of luck, unfortunately.